The details are now coming out on the Brian Koberger. I think I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. I'm not 100% sure. But he is the Washington State teacher assistant, PhD student, who has been arrested and charged with the quadruple murder at the University of Idaho. And the details now on the evidence for why he has been charged are coming out. And I wanted to share some of these details because we've talked about this case quite a lot. And I know many of you have been following it aggressively. And frankly, some of these details are chilling and they actually raise even more issues. The DNA was found of the killer, Kohlberger, on a knife sheath at the scene of the Idaho murder. They then made a match on that DNA by going through trash at his family's house, and they say finding his dad's DNA, which confirmed that there was that connection with Brian. This is according to the arrest warrant. And he was driving, if you remember, this Hyundai Elantra, the white car, and on the date of the murders, there were several videos showing that white Elantra driving by the murder house before stopping at 4:04 a.m., and then surveillance video shows the car leaving at 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed. And they also, some other details here. The one that I think is the most staggering, one of the survivors in this house, one of the two women on the first floor, says she saw a man 5'10" or taller, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows, wearing black clothing with a mask. She said the man walked right past her as she stood in a frozen shock phase, walked past her and left the house. Buck, this is crazy. Now, he turned off his cell phone. Some of you have been asking, hey, why would there not be cell phone records? 2:47 a.m., phone left his residence and didn't pick up again until 5:30 a.m., so he turned his phone off. But as all these details come out, Buck, he'd also been 12 times, based on cell phone data, close to this house late at night, which suggests that he may have been stalking one or more of the people in this house. But if anything, I can't get past the idea that this person would have seen someone and then not called police when that happened.
There has to be something that we don't know. One thing, and I want to return to that, because I read through this update on the case as well and thought to myself, you see a masked stranger at, what was it, 4 o'clock in the morning or something in the hallway of your house, and you don't think that's a problem that you would call? First of all,
or
you would
check
scream.
On your roommates.
You wouldn't scream. You wouldn't check on your roommates. You wouldn't call police. Now, there may be something that I'm missing here. I can't imagine what that would be, but I don't know.
Also,
but
why
I also
would
think
he
it's
kill her, Buck? Like, if you've already killed 4 people and somebody sees you, I wouldn't think you'd be like, well, I can't kill 5 people.
I think because he, killing somebody with a knife, if they're trying to defend themselves, they're standing up, is a lot harder, obviously, than stabbing somebody in their sleep, which is what this guy did. He killed 4 people in their sleep. So maybe he didn't want to. And obviously, if he had gone after her with a knife, I would assume she would have screamed. She might have woken up neighbors. It sounds almost like this person, the survivor. Look, I don't want to speculate. I don't know, but like, was she in a sleep state, or was she not really?
The whole thing is stranger.
The whole
to
thing
me
is bizarre. But on the law enforcement side of this, I have to say, remember we talked about this. We had Nancy Grace on. This all happened, what was it, November 13th of last year? Here we are now, January 5th. There were no details about this at all for weeks.
Yeah.
There were people who were sincerely concerned that the police had botched the investigation, had no leads. It turns out, now that we see this, they have this guy in custody, that the cops did a very good job of keeping it. And we raised this as a possibility. Maybe there's a lot they're just not letting out there. They don't want to give any indication to the suspect that they're onto him. They knew a lot. I mean, the fact that they had a sheath They had a sheath for a knife at the scene with DNA. They had an eyewitness to the individual. Now, he did have a mask on. This is a side note, but I've always said there's a lot of reasons why I oppose masks. The widespread wearing of masks actually makes us all less safe, too.
Yes.
This notion that people can go around and, if someone walks into a bank with a ski mask on and it's 70 degrees outside, you think to yourself, something weird's happening here. Someone goes in with one of these, N95 masks on because of COVID. Anyway, the cops knew a lot more about this than they were letting on, which is obviously a good thing. They've got an individual who, innocent until proven guilty. This guy looks about as guilty as you're going to find anybody at this stage of an investigation, given the DNA evidence at the scene, no explanation for this, everything we know about him. He apparently, also at the bottom of this article, Clay, he applied for an internship with the Pullman, Idaho Police Department.
Pullman, Washington, where Washington State
Pullman,
is.
Washington. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's right.
Pullman,
Washington.
Washington.
Washington State is like 10 miles away.
It's really close
from,
by, yeah.
University of Idaho.
In the fall of 2022. So this guy's studying, criminology?
Yes.
And applying for police department internships, and now he's in custody for a just truly heinous quadruple murder. But a lot of the techniques that you and I talked about, cell phone tracking, DNA, this is how they get people. This is how they are able to get the suspects and bring people to some measure of justice.
Not only that, Buck, he was a TA. Can you imagine the conversations, like the way we're talking about it? If you went to Washington State, everybody had to be talking about those murders of the Idaho students all the time. Probably with him. If you're in a criminology department, I would imagine that this was the number one topic by far. You're studying criminology, and 10 or 15 miles from campus, 4 people are murdered and they can't figure out who did it. He had to be. I would love to know from inside of Washington State. He had to be either with his students or with his colleagues talking about this murder all the time, having committed it.
You think this guy was speculating about the murders among students in an auditorium or whatever the setup would be at his school?
I think it's going to be super chilling.
It.
Yes, I think it's going to be super chilling as more and more evidence comes out. Because just think about it. If you're a college kid at Washington State and you're in a criminology course, this is one of the top stories in America for people who are just living their normal lives. For a criminology course, to have a murder like this happen just a few miles from campus is unbelievable to occur. The other thing we should mention, Buck, is they pulled over. And by the way, if you want to call in and react to this, we took calls before, 800-282-2882. Maybe you're in that area and you even interacted with this guy in some way now that we know who the alleged murderer is. If you want to share your story, like I'm talking about, if you're on that Washington State campus, if you're at the University of Idaho, if you knew this guy, I would love to hear what those interactions were like. But Buck, they had the FBI pull him over in Indiana, reportedly, because they wanted to see his hands, because he drove with his dad back cross country to Pennsylvania for the winter break. And the report is out there that they wanted to see whether there were any injuries to his hands. So they pulled him over for speeding in Indiana at the behest of the FBI.
And those injuries, I would assume, would have been suffered, those cuts to his hands from the knife slipping, most likely. That's right. What actually, people don't think about that, but especially if it's and I don't think we haven't.
They haven't found the murder weapon.
Right. They haven't seen the murder weapon, but if it's, let's say, a standard kitchen knife, that's not meant for it's not a combat knife, so your hand can slip down the handle very easily and you can get cuts on your hand from that, which I think is what they're looking for, because I didn't see anything about their belief that there would be defensive wounds from the victim specifically on his hands, especially if they were asleep. I don't think you would expect there really would be any defensive wounds or very minimal defensive wounds. So, or certainly no wounds on the aggressor either. I think, Clay, also the white Hyundai Elantra came into play here, right?
Yeah,
they've seen reporting about that.
Yeah, they were able to track it. And again, they saw the car pass in the 4 a.m. hour multiple times, including driving away from that area at a high rate of speed.
You think, we don't know, just based on the fact pattern, the fact that there was, it seems like at a minimum surveillance, right? It would be surveillance of his intended victims. But you mentioned the word stalking. I mean, to me, that the stalking might imply that he knew at least one of the victims.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Do you no, I just, know, I don't know. I'm just, do you think right now there's a part of me that just feels like it's hard to believe it's that random given the fact pattern. I think we're going to find out that he knew one of the victims in some capacity or was maybe obsessed with one of the victims in some capacity, that it wasn't just a totally random serial killer situation.
That makes some sense to me. And even Buck, like when I saw this guy and when I've been reading the details about him from high school and college, he seems like a guy who had a lot of troubles. This is not going to surprise people, typically, unfortunately, in stories like these, with women in general, right? Like, he wasn't the kind of guy who got along well with women. It wouldn't stun me if we find out that he liked one of these girls, was out at a bar, hit on her, and, like, she gave him a cold shoulder or something like that, and he became obsessed with her from that point going forward. The other thing that I think is going to loom here large is, frankly, was this the first? He has no record, right? It seems stunning to me that the first ever crime you would commit would be a quadruple murder. Are we going to find out that as this guy has traversed the country, that maybe he's connected to some other crimes of violence and gotten away with them before? Does that make sense? Like, it's very rare from a criminology perspective for a guy to just suddenly snap and commit a quadruple murder, and he's never broken the law before in a serious way.
Usually you find out in these cases, as we all know, just from series like Mindhunter and these true crime and true detective series, that there's at least a very common thing is violence against animals at a young age. Torturing of animals, things like that. There's usually a backstory to it. We haven't seen much of that yet, but I think you're right. We'll find out that this was not out of nowhere.
And the one other thing I would add, and again, we'll take some calls on this because I know there was a great deal of interest on this. I would think now that they found the Hyundai Elantra, Buck, that it would be virtually impossible for there not to be murder residue in some way inside of that car, presuming that he committed a quadruple murder and then left and got in that vehicle. No matter how much he tried to clean it, I would think that there would be some blood residue, some DNA that would still be there. Not to mention, he had to get rid of this knife somehow. And wherever this knife is, whether they're able to retain it or not, just carrying that knife in the car and all these things would also create, I would think, a lot of DNA evidence. And if you remember, did you watch, I'm sure you did back in the day on Netflix, Making a Murderer, when everybody was watching that show? Did you watch it?
I actually saw a few episodes of it.
Yeah.
I didn't see all of it.
One of the parts in there that is incredibly detailed is alleged blood evidence on a car that was very old, in general. But the idea that he would have been able to commit a quadruple murder, get in that Hyundai Elantra, and not have left behind tons of evidence, I think is very unlikely as well. I also want to give you some more details. One of our writers, Bobby Barak, he does a really good job covering a variety of stories, and you can read him at Outkick. He has got a good analysis of this affidavit that now has been released in the quadruple murder. And many of you want to weigh in, but I also want to hit you with a few more details. We were reading from TMZ earlier, and this one is more detailed about what the roommate saw, which to me, and I don't know, do you agree, Buck? The most staggering, difficult to understand part of this evidence now is this roommate who was on the first floor allegedly waking up and being aware. So I'm going to read from this and then let Buck react, and then we'll take some of your calls. The roommate awoke at 4 a.m., opened the door, and saw a masked man dressed in black inside the home, according to the probable cause filing, which was just unsealed in Idaho. The roommate thought she heard her, woke up because she thought she heard her roommate playing with the dog on the third floor. A short time later, she heard what she thought was the roommate saying, "There's someone here. This is chilling." She then opened her door, heard crying coming from one of her roommate's rooms, and a male voice saying, "It's okay. I'm going to help you." The roommate then opened her door again around, she says, 4:17 a.m., saw, quote, "a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her." The male walked past her, and she says she stood in a frozen shock phase. That is the report. So, Buck, I mean, it's crazy, right?
Chilling, and with that series of steps of facts, it does make it seem that one of the victims may have spoken to the killer. Because we had been led to believe up to this point that they were all
totally asleep. Yeah.
Totally asleep. This is...
It's very strange. So there's several things that come to mind, and we'll take your calls. Why does she not call the police? Right?
Well, that's the part of this that I don't want to go too far ahead of where this is in the facts, just because, there's going to be a tremendous amount of... I'm sure this individual feels, very...
I don't know how you'd ever sleep again if 4 people got murdered in your house, period, much less if you saw the killer.
And apparently police only showed up at 11:58 a.m. the next day, almost at lunchtime was when the police actually got there, were called. So there must be some things. Look, there was so much that was held back in the beginning. I just think that we're going to find out more in the days ahead that will fill in, because some of this doesn't make sense. How could you see this person at this time be scared? Yep. It's not like she saw him and thought, oh, it's one of my roommate's friends, and I just went back to sleep. Be scared and not call the police
at 4:17 a.m. and to have heard the things that, according to this affidavit, she did hear. Because remember, one of the questions we've been asking for a while is, how was there no audio? Like, how did she not wake up? How did they not hear? And also, the question I have too, Buck, is, and I would love to hear from a police officer, why wouldn't you want it known that there was an eyewitness? And the other question I have, if he'd already killed 4 people, why would he walk past her? Remember, that was one of the questions we asked from the get-go. We thought maybe the doors were locked.
Well, there were
maybe
2 survivors, right?
Yeah,
on the
that's
first floor of the building.
Why did he kill 4 people and leave this girl, who he clearly saw, and not harm her? Like, you would think, again, if you're a killer and you've already killed 4 people, having someone as an eyewitness, you would expect, at least I would, that the police might get called immediately. Also, why didn't this girl walk upstairs and check when she saw this stranger at 4:17? Why wouldn't she have gone upstairs and checked on her roommates right then? How much different might this story have been if she had done that as well?
A lot of people have a lot of questions about this, obviously. This is every call we've got in right now on the lines pertains to this case. Let's see. Kat in North Carolina. Kat, you want to weigh in on the Idaho slayings. What do you have for us?
Hi. Well, now after listening to everything that you've been saying, it is chilling. But my one question from the very beginning was why he did not harm the dog. And being vegan, okay, not me, but this person, I mean, this is just another nail in the coffin of his guilt.
Well, I think if the dog wasn't barking or making noise, he maybe wouldn't have seen it as a
threat. But the thing is that obviously he can kill 4 people. The fact that he didn't silence the dog because maybe the dog knew him, or the way he was with animals, someone that is good with animals can calm an animal down. So I don't know. That's something else that just nothing was ever brought up about
the dog not creating a huge stir. Thank you for the call. Is something that many people have raised as an issue. Now, based on this report, it sounds like the dog may have. The thing that is staggering to me,
a lot of dogs
don't-
bark and no one pays attention.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like a car alarm, right? I mean, people don't assume someone's breaking in, so don't assume even if it's 4 a.m. if a dog barks.
The two things that don't make sense here, from a purely like, if you saw someone at 4:17 a.m. wearing a mask, clad entirely in black, inside of your home, what percentage of you listening to me right now would call police as soon as that person left? Or if you had roommates, go upstairs and check and see how your roommates were. I think it's a huge percentage.
Did she go back to sleep after that?
Because most people wouldn't be able to go back to sleep.
This is her home.
You're right. That's a great question, too. It's still pitch black at 4:17 a.m. And the second part of this, again, from the killer perspective, why would he not do something to her? If you're trying to commit the perfect crime.
I mean, he's a psycho killer. I think it's hard for anyone to try to get into the motive, especially because we don't even know the full motivations. Did he know these? He might have known all 4 of the people that he killed, and we just don't know that yet, right? Maybe he didn't know this. He might not have known the people on the first floor. We don't know. Again, that's total speculation.
But if you're a criminology student and even if you're a psycho killer, it seems quite clear that he didn't want to be caught, right? So why would you allow someone who was a witness, who could see you made eye contact with, to be okay? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me either.
Well, I mean, he would have had to go after her, and maybe he's afraid she would have made noise.
Like all those things.
He would have had to chase her, and there might have been a more of a struggle. The fact that he had the conversation, again, based on the affidavit, we're just going on what the facts are as we know them right now, that he had a conversation with, or any kind of exchange that didn't involve shouting, screaming, and oh my God, there's a crazy man with a knife, makes it seem like either look, man, you remember what it was like when you were in college. I remember what it was like when I was in college. Sometimes people have had a long night out, a lot of drinking. They're really out of it. You don't necessarily, the person may have been out of it having this initial exchange. So that doesn't indicate to me necessarily that they knew who this guy was or had any previous interaction with him, but it certainly seems to raise that possibility. So there's a lot more we're going to find out.
And again, there's reports now that one of the people was saying, hey, there's someone in here upstairs. Now, again, it's different than maybe in many of our lives. Like if you are living in a college house and there are 6 or 5 or whatever the number of kids that lived in that house there's constantly boys and girls coming in and out, right? This was a party house. But when you see a guy dressed all in black, wearing a mask, this goes to your point again, Buck. If we weren't in this era where people were still wearing masks because they were concerned about their health, then anytime you saw someone in a mask, you'd be like, this dude is up to no good, right? Prior to 3 years ago, if you ever saw somebody walking around in a black mask, you'd be like, this person is trying to commit a crime.
Yes.
Right?
So, I argued this from the very beginning, by the way, because there are actually public ordinances that say that unless, for your job, for dust inhalation, or if you're on a construction site, but you're not allowed to wear a mask in public. Yeah. And this was ignored by the Fauciite lunatics, of course, along with so many other things, because visual facial recognition is very important in society for a whole host of reasons. Safety is actually one of them. And people say, oh, well, they'll just wear the mask anyway. Okay. If one person is wearing a mask and nobody else is, you notice that person more. You're aware of their presence. If everybody or half the people or a third of the people are wearing masks, you can blend right in and hide your identity. So, I just think this guy probably kept that mask on, getting into the car, driving off to wherever he was. I'm sure there were security cameras that saw him that didn't get a full look at his face. And even people there wouldn't say, hey, who's that guy? Again, like I said, you got a balaclava on or you've got a ski mask on for no reason. People know something. That's in every movie in the 80s, the ski mask was like, I'm a burglar, basically.
In 2019, if you saw a guy in a mask, you'd be like, this guy is up to something, and you'd be really scared about it. By 2020, 21, 22, you could at least think, oh, maybe he's just a total lunatic COVID pansy. But this story does not add up based on the details that are coming out right now. I can't get over the revelation that we got of one of the girls that was left alive in that Idaho house having come, according to the affidavit, face-to-face with the killer at 4:17 a.m. in the morning that night?
It's something that is going to have to be explained as we go through that case, but also the cell phone of the alleged killer was there the next morning at 9:10, 9:12 a.m., something like that. That's what I just saw.
I hadn't even seen that. So he drove back by near the scene of the crime the day after, or the few hours after he had committed the murder.
He returned. Now that's, I mean, look, you're dealing with pure evil here. So it's just, when you say things like it's unfathomable or unbelievable, well, yes, to a normal moral person with even any basic semblance of morality or decency, these things are unthinkable. So you just have to then look at the facts as they are, and it seems right now that he returned, that his cell phone was in the area, in the vicinity. How close, we'd have to get more specifics, at about 9:12 a.m. the next morning. So
that was before police had been called still, to put that into context for everybody out there, because the police were not called till just before noon, I believe, on the day, that near lunchtime on the morning of that murder, because it appears, based on the timeline, that the murder occurred sometime in the 4 a.m. hour. And I would not be surprised, honestly, Buck. Remember, the conversation was that they were worried about whether the killer might show up for the memorial service, because there is this desire to be smarter than everyone else. And I can't stop thinking about the conversations that might have occurred on the Washington State campus when you're studying criminology, and that's what he was attempting to get a PhD in. As you pointed out earlier, Buck, he had put in an application to be an intern with the Pullman, Washington Police Department, which is where Washington State is, just about 10 miles or so from the University of Idaho. I mean, it feels on some level like not only was this guy a psychopath, but that he might have been training to try to get away with as many violent, predatory behaviors as he could have.
Just want to give this attribution. This is from Brian Enton of News Nation, that new...
He's done a great job covering this case in general.
News channel. He said Kohberger's cell phone was tracked back to the house after the murders between 9:12 and 9:21 a.m. The phone was near the house again on November 13th. This, likely alleged quadruple murderer might have gone back to the place where he did this heinous crime before police were even able to get there.
You wonder if he might have gone back to pick up something. Maybe he left behind some piece of evidence and he was driving back by to see if police had been called yet, saw that they had not. I mean, this is me just hypothesizing. If he left in a hurry and he was panicked, he may have wondered, hey, I haven't heard about the police being called or anything. It wouldn't shock me, Buck, if he had a scanner in his house to try to keep tabs on whether police had been called.
I'm somebody who, in general, I feel like I'm, the death penalty issue as a general matter, I'm open to arguments for and against the death penalty as a general matter.
Yeah.
And then something like this happens, and assuming that this individual is found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by a jury, which I think is, we'll see what ends up happening here. Assuming that happens, though, this is one of those cases where you just say, no, this is the death penalty is actually the only penalty that could possibly even begin to get near some measure of justice. I don't know. I mean, that's just an emotional response to this, but to me, if I'm the district attorney, the Idaho State's attorney, whatever the designation may be, no deal. This ends with a needle in the arm, as far as I'm concerned. I don't see a way around it.
From my perspective, having done criminal cases, my apprehension with the death penalty is based on certitude. In some cases, people get the death penalty, and frankly, they haven't done it, right? We've seen
Well, that's
cases,
why I'm persuadable, is because you want to avoid those cases, obviously. But, I mean, given what we're seeing here...
when it's a clear-cut case of predatory, psychopathic behavior, it's very hard to defend this guy deserving to live for the next 60 years on taxpayer dole inside of a prison sentence.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody who would go to a supermax facility and rightly so, or a maximum security facility. But it's it's been really rough. I remember when we were taking calls, the people of Moscow, Idaho, were rightly terrified. I mean, imagine you have this individual in your community. Now, we know that he ended up driving cross country, but you can't know that at the time. You can't know if he's going to strike again.
And he didn't drive across cross country for 6 weeks, right? Or whatever it was. So I always think about it now in the concept of being a parent, Buck. Can you imagine if you had a kid at the University of Idaho? I wouldn't have wanted my son or daughter back on campus.
I really need to know. I mean, to go bringing this full circle, when I say I think we all really need to know why the roommate didn't call the police.
Yeah, you can't stop thinking about it.
I need to know that, right? I mean, this is gonna bother me today. And I know we're ending on kind of a tough
Dark
note here today, but
that's what I told you, Buck. I've been on a text thread with friends who've been obsessed with this University of Idaho case, and I know a lot of people out there listening to us have right now. Maybe we're going to get more evidence.
A lot of us, fortunately, don't have much personal experience of being near true evil. And when you even read about and know the details of a story like this in a otherwise, quiet, safe community, evil visited Moscow, Idaho that night, and I think it really grips people. I think it's there was something demonic.
I don't think there's any doubt at all about it. And it's even scarier when this guy is a PhD student. He's not totally incompetent, right? He is evil and maybe fairly intelligent, which is a really scary combination. And I think that's what grips so many people about this case.